What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to the C.S. Joseph Podcast, Premium Edition. So today is Season 14, Part 3, Episode 4. What is the ENFJ and ISTJ relationship all about? Also known as the natural pair or the bronze pair, as we have colloquially called these particular pairs. And as with all natural pairs, this is one of the absolute best possible relationships that anyone could have or anyone could get into. And in my opinion, this particular pair, the bronze pair, the natural pair, is probably the best or the second best, depending on a person's life and what their overall preferences are for building a family on top of, basically. So for all of you out there who are like family oriented and want to have children, want to keep your bloodline going, I highly recommend highly recommend this particular pair. ENFJs and ISTJs together at last. It's kind of interesting because my brother-in-law, he's an ISTJ and he's in a relationship with an ENFJ. And ever since he's been in a relationship with her, I've noticed that he's been like way less angry. Like way less angry, which is great. I'm actually super happy for that opportunity for him, because let's be honest, he's probably the angriest, if not most racist person I've ever met in my entire life. But you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing for me to call somebody racist in that regard, because as part of the soul temple, psychologically speaking, the shadow pole of the wrath side of the wrath types, or the justification types, is known as discrimination. And discrimination is just natural prejudice. It's just natural racism. And as so long as humanity exists, so long as the soul temple exists, which will always exist, it will, in effect, racism will never go away. Racism will always be among human beings indefinitely. It'll never go away. It'll never be a, quote, problem to be solved. You gotta actually kind of look at racism like a survival instinct, as I've said in previous videos. And no one understands that more than ENFPs and ISTJs. So yeah. And thank God ENFJs exist, because then ENFJs can be like so soothing, so calming to them, and make them feel better, make them feel comfortable, make them feel respected, make them feel wanted. And then all of a sudden, everything is right in the world. Everything that they were previously mad about, all of a sudden, reality just ain't that bad anymore. And they can finally relax, which is great. It's great that ENFJs bring that to ISTJs and cause them to relax. It's like, hey, you know, all of a sudden I got something that I can be super happy about. And that's true. They really do. I mean, ENFJs bring an insane amount of joy to the ISTJ, in as much as the ISTJ brings an insane amount of validation to the ENFJ. You know, and that's what bronze pairs are all about. Natural pairs, they just love bringing each other their cognitive origins. You know, cognitive origins being the thing that people end up seeking out the most, right? It's super important. And without cognitive origin, like, there's no reason to live life. Like, life is just not worth living, you know, in terms of people. And that can be super, super frustrating to many. So yeah, I think people will find that the more that they actually explore the natural pair, they realize just how utterly valuable they are on a consistent basis. You know, they definitely, you know, just even from a cognitive origin standpoint, they do make life worth living. They make life fun and exciting. They also make life really, really easy. Now, granted, there's still some negatives when it comes to the natural pair, but there's negatives for any of the relationships, any of the couplings. There's always going to be negatives, and it's not something that you can get away from. Not really. Not ever. And it's not like people want to really necessarily get away from those negatives. Having negatives in life is actually ultimately a good thing. It's just making sure whether or not people are strong enough or powerful enough to be able to deal with those negatives and overcome them. And then they derive from themselves a sense of accomplishment from getting over those negatives, those obstacles in life, those bitter roots in life. And I think no one really understands that as much as the ISTJ. The ISTJ is super interesting because like they can oscillate from being entirely discouraged to someone who is insanely encouraging. And I find that one of the best things about ISTJs is how encouraging they actually can be to other people. They're walking encouragement generators, courage generators. They make people more willful and able to get through obstacles by sheer force of will. They're like force of will generators or augmenters, or kind of like that ISTJ Ando from this old television show called Heroes. And when he finally got superpowers in the show, another superhero person or someone with powers would just have to touch him, and his ability would just supercharge their ability and make them more capable and able to get things done. And that's what ISTJs are. They're like these huge conductors of electricity. They are supercharger people. They supercharge others to get through any obstacle. It's a different form of support that ISTJs don't often actually get very much credit for in life. And I find that really sad. You know, yeah, we throw ISTJs under the bus a lot here within the Ego Hacker community because we throw everybody under the bus here in the Ego Hacker community. But ISTJs, they just never really get credit for being that supercharger. They just don't. They really don't. You know, it's always the ISFJ or the ESFJ that ends up getting that like credit for, you know, being that support structure. But ISTJs also provide a support structure, but what it is for is that it's really the support structure of encouragement. It's the support structure, not necessarily amount of empowerment. That's more of an INFP or an ESTJ thing. But in terms of encouragement, I have noticed that ISTJs are extremely encouraging because they know what it's like to be discouraged. They're all about being discouraged. And that's one thing that I've noticed about ENFJs is that ENFJs are actually also insanely easily discouraged. I was in a sexual relationship with an ENFJ for many years, 3-4 years. I don't even remember how long it was, but we were together a long time, and she would always get discouraged on a regular basis because, yeah, sure, she was insecure about what she knew, TI inferior and whatnot, but she's also very easily discouraged about her performance. She was always worried about whether or not she was good enough, or if she was worthy enough, or if she was actually investing her time, resources, and energy in the right place. And she would often come to me for encouragement. And then let's be honest, like an ENTP as a source of encouragement, you know, I'll be honest, like we suck at that. Even though we have expert intuition hero, we really suck at encouragement. I wish I was better at encouragement. You know, having ISTJs in my life, there's one particular ISTJ, he's a good friend of mine. His name's Jason. And Jason always knows exactly what to say to me, especially like when I'm down or if I'm feeling discouraged and whatnot. He always knows exactly what to say and just get me right back on the right path. He's like this conductor of courage, basically. And that's one of the reasons why ENFJs are so drawn to ISTJs, because ENFJs oftentimes need that encouragement. And what's great about ISTJs is that they stick around. They have this insane endurance about them. Really insane endurance. And they can definitely endure. They can endure hardship, unlike most people. And the ENFJ being able to walk around in confidence, knowing that if they fail, the ISTJ is not going to discourage them. The ISTJ is instead going to encourage them. You know, and this is a big deal. Reason why, you know, like when it comes to my own relationship with her golden pair is an ISTJ, and I often learn about ISTJs because ESTPs, just like ENFJs, are also just as easily discouraged. And it's not something you'd ever actually be able to tell or figure it out just by looking at an ESTP. Because ESTPs, like, they put on a good show, about being the strongest person in the room when they're actually one of the weakest in the room, and they're so very easily discouraged, especially ESTP women, so easily discouraged. But ISTJs, and because they get so discouraged, that discouragement leads them to failure, basically. And it's no different for ENFJs, it's the same thing. But that discouragement, it leads to failure. They end up having big struggles as a result. And it's just so sad to watch. It's very sad. It's very problematic, right? Very problematic for them. And I've always been envious of ISTJs and their ability to be so encouraging, because it's like, hey, yeah, I need to learn to be way more encouraging. Because, sometimes I could just see Railgun look at me, and she's like, I don't even know that she's being discouraged, and then she ends up failing, and then my SI Inferior gets upset at the failure, basically, when the entire time she was just looking to me for some encouragement. That's all she wanted. That's all she was looking for. And I know that if I actually spent more time trying to be a source of encouragement, instead of, intimidating extroverted sensing demon that intimidates SI Nemesis to the point where SI Nemesis just easily throws its hands up in the air and just gives up, right? And as much as ENFJs just turn off their introvert intuition parents and then they just give up, because they're so discouraged, right? These two psychological types, they need encouragement, and that's what ISTJs provide. Because why? Because ISTJs know what it is to be discouraged more than anybody. That NI demon is in there, their extroverted sensing nemesis worrying about their ability to perform constantly. So much so that they end up giving up before they even try. And they do it so subtly, that they do it so secretly, that no one actually knows this about them. And to expose that part of them, honestly, it'll cause a rage, because it'll bring their ESTP unconscious to the surface. And it's like, wow, yeah, you totally saw that, didn't you? They're always trying to put up this facade. And some ISTJs are better at it than others. But my brother-in-law, he's really good at it. Really good, because he's unconscious developed with his octagram. He loves him some discrimination, basically. And that's another thing about ESTPs and ENFJs. They absolutely hate being discriminated against, even though they often do indulge in some discrimination themselves, because discrimination is a little bit of a part of them, because the deadly sin of wrath is their secondary deadly sin. But at the end of the day, seeing somebody else discriminate on their behalf and then give them that special treatment is something that is sacred to an ESTP. And it's something that is highly appreciated by the ENFJ. Oftentimes the ENFJ has to go through life and it's like, okay, yeah, hey, no one listens to me. No one actually appreciates me. I work really hard, but I don't get any actual recognition. And one of the ways the ISTJ can provide that recognition is by discriminating. For example, let's say they go into a restaurant and then let's say they're at a family gathering, right? And then the ENFJ's family is just basically shitting on them. And then the ISTJ goes up to the ENFJ and is like, okay, well, let's leave because these fucks are just people that we don't need to be around. Let's just go elsewhere and have more fun than these people. And then the ENFJ is, oh my god, yes. Let's just get away from them. That's okay. I mean, it's funny because the ENFJ knows that the ISTJ is affiliative like them. And the ISTJ is doing the right thing by being like, okay, yeah, using my ESTP shadow, I'm going to tell you all to fuck off, and I'm going to go take my ENFJ away from you people because you're just destroying them. And then we're going to go have our own fun and do our own thing and be away from you people. And then the ENFJ feels super special. And then they end up becoming encouraged as a result. This is basically the core relationship dynamic of the ISTJ and ENFJ. Whereas the ENFJ, what the ISTJ gets out of the ENFJ just brings comfort to them, helps them calm down, helps them relax. The ENFJ can be a very relaxing force in the ISTJ's life, even to the point of teaching the ISTJ how the ISTJ can get comfortable on their own and relax on their own when the ENFJ isn't even around. That's powerful. I will admit that oftentimes, I regret not being as encouraging as an ISTJ would be, but because I know this, I can put in the effort with my introverted sensing and go out of my way to be encouraging. But it's just so hard. It's so hard to guide the thinking of another TI parent. It's so hard for me to be encouraging. And as a result, I've come to realize, she doesn't have very many sources of encouragement in her life. And the same thing happened to my ex, the ENFJ. I really was not that great of a source of encouragement for her. And because of that, and it's so interesting because, you look at ISTJs, they complain constantly. They're like the number one complainers of the types, with the exception of maybe the ENFP. They're like the chief complainers, right? But the thing is, though, is that while they complain just so much, they also are insanely encouraging at the same time. And it just amazes me how the ISTJ is basically completely abandoned by the MBTI blogosphere, or the typosphere, as some of the ego hackers have started to call it, basically. And I think this is just entirely ridiculous. ISTJs often get a bad rap when ISTJs are entirely necessary. Yes, they can be really boring. Yes, they can lead really boring lives. But the thing is that ENFJs, like ESTPs, need consistency in their life. Because if they don't have consistency in their life, they have no system to follow. And the ISTJ provides that support structure in the form of a system of consistent expectations, so that the ESTP and the ENFJ never feel set up for failure, because those consistent expectations are always the same. And those types need sameness. They feed off of sameness. But then you look at me, an ENTP, I'm never the same. Never. I'm constantly different, constantly changing at every single moment of every day. And it's I'm a very routine person, but I have a different routine every day. And that is like whiplash to Templar types, but especially extroverted Templar types. They really struggle with that. This is an area of struggle within my relationship with Railgun. This was an area of struggle with my relationship with... And it continues to, be a struggle in this area, as I learn from ISTJs in my life to become more encouraging to them, as well as become more consistent. The problem is that given my own psychological makeup, I have to make a choice. I can either be more organized with extroverted thinking, or I could be more consistent with introverted sensing. I can't do both. So in order to adapt to the kindred relationship between myself and Railgun, for example, I had to, and also do something called soft locking. It puts me closer into my superego, which means I've become more of an extroverted thinker, because she just so desperately needs that emotional connectedness, so that my brain has automatically adapted and brought me closer and even deeper into my UDUF octagram for myself as an ENTP, to be able to provide that extroverted thinking. But the problem is that doing so, I end up sacrificing even more of my consistency, because I'm getting closer to my ESFP superego, which, guess what, folks, is still a starter. And I have a starter ego going into a starter superego. Do you think there's any consistency there? Do you think there's much consistency? No. And that lack of consistency often is discouraging to ENFJs and ESTPs. It's a big issue. It's a really big issue. So I wanted to take the time at the beginning of this lecture to basically tell you folks, hey, there's so much more going on than you even realize. Way more going on, to the point where people just don't get it. ISTJs do not get enough credit in that area. They really don't. And I'll admit that it's definitely partially my fault. I should have taken more responsibility to understand them. But because of my relationship with, I have been able to learn more about them and learn more about their value. it's sad to me that I have to admit that oftentimes I have written off ISTJs in my life. And I shouldn't have. And that's wrong of me. Very wrong. Just as much as, I see ESTPs write off INTJs all the time. I mean, that's also entirely ridiculous and not fair to them. So yeah, we learn our lessons. And that's why it's important for us to explore and have multiple and many relationships in our life, because that gives us the opportunity to learn and learn wisdom. Who wants to live a very incomplete life, So ultimately, that is why the ENFJ and the ISTJ are drawn to one another, right there. So let's talk about some differences between the types in terms of their gender real quick. Let's just get that out of the way. Obviously, you have masculine idealism and you have solipsism. Masculine idealism with the ISTJ being super sacrificing, putting in a lot of effort, always being there, always being available. The thing is that ISTJs, what's really cool about them, even though they're introverts, they really don't actually want to be alone. And it's so interesting because ENFJs and ESTPs, those two types, really struggle with loneliness in a big way. A very, very big way. Like the ISTJ would just stay on the phone with them and not even say anything, but they're just still on the phone with them. And then they don't have to feel so alone. That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. There are times I wish I could do more of that, and I don't do enough of that for her. It's because I'm so busy all the time. Out there, following my purpose in life, running these businesses, running this community, being compassionate to others as much as I can be, as well as continuing my journey to gain more wisdom over time. The female solipsism, though, when it comes to an ISTJ, well, they can be insanely entitled. And that's not to say that the men can't be entitled either. They can be, but it's overboard with ISTJs. Entitled to their comfort zone, entitled to something called precedent. For example, my ISTP cousin and his ISTJ wife, I'll never forget, when he told me that he regretted taking his ISTJ wife to Anthony's one time. I know I've been talking about Anthony's, the restaurant, a lot recently. It's because it's there's literally one just right over there. So I see it a lot, so I guess, top of mind, insight, right? Insight, top of mind, so... And Andy's is an extremely expensive restaurant to eat at. I remember 10 years ago going there, and for an extremely small portion, it was $35 a plate. That was insane. But I'm sure it's even worse now. It's probably $100, so you go to Ruth's Chris, it's at least $50 a plate, and I'm sure Anthony's is probably the same thing. ISTJs, they operate in terms of precedent, and he set the precedent because he was taking her to all these fancy restaurants, and then all of a sudden she started expecting these fancy restaurants. So ENFJs, you guys got to be careful about setting new precedents. You can go all out and make a really great experience with an ISTJ, but then eventually they're going to have that expectation over and over again, and that has to be sustained. You got to understand something about ISTJs. ISTJs are one of the 16 types. I hella look up to them for this. Hella look up to ISTJs for this. But the ISTJ, can be so easily content with very little and be content with nothing. It is excellent. It is amazing. But careful when you start setting precedents with them, especially if they're a solipsistic woman. Oh, man. You're in for some interesting times. You're going to have to watch out for that, okay? So be aware of that. Let's look at the ENFJ, the masculine idealism of the ENFJ. They go out of their way, especially as a pride type, they go out of the way to try to be know everything, to the point where they're at risk of being a know-it-all. Even if they're a woman, it doesn't matter. They're always trying to learn something. They're always trying to figure out the truth about things. They're constantly in a state of learning because they realize that the less they know, the less they will be able to perform. And their extroverted sensing child just can't deal with the fact that they won't be able to perform for their lover, right? And from a masculine idealism perspective, They're going to go all the way to give as much special treatment as they can to their ISTJ woman, always constantly making her feel good, always keeping her top of mind, always wanting her, always trying to, perform, etc. And trying to ignore those feelings of not being worthy enough or not investing enough, which is why they end up giving so much, because they're worried that they're not doing enough or they are not good enough. And this is how they end up becoming discouraged. But the masculine idealism takes it even to another level, because it's like they hold themselves to this insanely high standard that literally no one else can live up to. They can't even live up to it themselves, and then they expect everyone else to live up to that same standard, which is insane. It's one of the reasons why it's such a hard time having a relationship with her dad. It's one of the reasons why I have such a hard time having a relationship with my dad. ENFJs push themselves so hard and hold themselves to this egregiously high standard that they hold everybody else to this high standard, and if you don't measure up, their cruelty comes out, and they are cruel. Because from their perspective, they think of themselves so highly that they literally think that it's their fault if you fail. And that's how far masculine idealism can go. They will take that burden of responsibility. They will take on more fault upon themselves for your failure. And that's especially important for the natural pair, as we'll explore soon. ENFJ women, they can do the same thing, except they'll be pretty selfish about it, and they'll literally take favors that you do for them and then give it to other people who are in need, because it's like, well, I don't need this. Thank you for doing this nice thing, but I'm going to give it to this other person. And even though you're trying to show them recognition, they will just give the recognition you give them to somebody else, so that they can selfishly get those reactions, to get those jollies. It can lead to some insane entitlement to learning, entitlement to showing other people things, entitlement to being the center of attention, entitlement to being the person who is the cook in the kitchen at all times, entitlement to creating joy in other people's lives, to the point where sometimes they'll even compete with their ISTJ over it. It's kind of lame. But this happens. This happens on a daily basis. So don't forget, women view men as a business, right? The ISTJ or ENFJ man must carry his burden of performance. Harder for ISTJ men to do, especially when they're comfortable. ISTJ men, they can get so stuck in their comfort zone that their comfort zone actually ends up becoming a source of discouragement for them, and they end up not actually producing, which can be an issue. And the ENFJ woman can enable the ISTJ into that, which can suck. Men view women as art. The ISTJ or ENFJ woman must carry her burden of submission and preservation of beauty, which is harder for ENFJ women to do, because ENFJ women are so external in everybody else that they're SI tricks, so they end up ignoring themselves. And if you'll notice something about ENFJ women, out of all the 16 types, ENFJ women, especially in the United States of America, are the most likely to be obese. They're the most likely to be fat. And honestly, I am grossed out by ENFJ women probably the most, I would say, because of just how unattractive they are constantly. Ugh. It really, really bothers me. Really bothers me. So let's talk about cognitive origins and what these types get from each other. So cognitive origins. So the ENFJ has the cognitive origin of validation, right? That's what they're seeking out of life the most. They want to be able to validate themselves and have other people validate them. ISTJs are constantly looking for justification. They want to know what rules can be broken when. They want to know what they can get away with. They want to know what they are justified in doing, even if it comes down to being justified to be angry. Everything to an ISTJ is about justification. But then they have secondary cognitive origins, which are insanely key. ISTJs definitely want to feel intimate and connected to their lover, in as much as an ENFJ would like to have power and authority within the context of their relationship. Power and authority. And it's interesting because ISTJs, they're basically the most responsible of all the 16 types. This is one of the reasons why they have such a bad rap of being boring, is because they're taking on more responsibility than anyone else. And that's, again, a part of their masculine idealism if it's an ISTJ man. they will take on so much more responsibility due to masculine idealism than anyone else. This is one of the reasons why ISTJ men oftentimes are seen as beta males instead of alpha males. Although my brother-in-law, he's very ESTP developed for an ISTJ. He's actually pretty alpha by contrast. He's like the Vin Diesel, Channing Tatum variant of an ISTJ, which is pretty alpha. But the other variants, the rest of the variants, they're pretty beta, basically, in terms of the colloquial judgment that we would have here within the United States of America, right? So these two types, like the natural pairs, like, deliver each other's cognitive origins to each other on silver platters. They just do naturally. So, for example, how are these basic origin needs met? Primarily through the optimistic loops of extroverted feeling to introverted feeling. So, like, for example, the extroverted feeling hero of the ENFJ to the introverted feeling child, as much as like Dave Superpowers talks about cognitive looping or jumping as he calls it. Cognitive looping is when you have a hero and a child function just hanging out with each other, doing stuff to each other without a parent function in between to stop the interaction. Well, the thing is, though, is that the natural pair, the functions loop on each other, between each other. So the hero of the other person loops with the child of you, and then your hero is looping with their child. So it's like it's an external cognitive loop, and it just keeps going and going and going. And this is why ENFJs constantly are providing justification all the time. This is why ISTJs are providing validation all the time to ENFJs. So they're able to give each other's cognitive origin. But there's even something more special about this. Their secondary origins are also being met. So like the ENFJ is looking for power and authority, but because justification is being served up to them, the ISTJ will provide justification consistently to the ENFJ. And when the ENFJ feels justified, for example, to speak their mind with their TI inferior, they actually do feel empowered. They actually do feel like they are an authority on a subject because the ISTJ has justified them with their cognitive origin. And ENFJs just love that, and they get off on that. They absolutely love it. It's like the greatest thing in the world. Conversely, when the ENFJ provides validation and shows the ISTJ how valid they are, the ISTJ ends up feeling intimate and connected to the ENFJ because of that validation, right? So they're even able to meet each other's secondary origins as well, not just primary origins, within the context of this sexual relationship. It's a miracle. It's great. Let's be honest, these two types need each other. They really need each other. And it's just so amazing for them to be there for each other, that these two people exist for one another to be able to do this. Kind of makes me a little envious. You know what I'm saying? They really can reach happiness together. And that's basically how it is with all the natural pairs, but it's truly incredible. It's truly incredible what can be done here. It's like two puzzle pieces. They may not fit perfectly together, but they make it work, but the action of making it work actually ends up having an amazing result for both people involved. So, yeah. So, getting into a natural pair, well, that can be a little tough. Finding ISTJs is actually really easy. They're often tutors at universities. They are often firefighters. They are often police officers. They are often people in public office. They work for public institutions. They often are educators and teachers. They are often like on the school board, public servants. Anything that has to do with public servant, that's where you find ISTJs. You're trying to find ISTJ woman, you're trying to find ISTJ man, you're trying to date them. Well, you go to those places, and that's where you find them, and you ask them out. You see what I'm saying? That's where they're at. You just go there, right? Firefighters, EMTs, right? Those are ISTJs. That's where they are. ENFJs, they also could be ENTs. They also get into public service. They're not really firefighters, but these are the nurses. You want to find ENFJ, just go to like the emergency department or the med-surg floor or wing of a hospital. You'll find ENFJs all the time. You'll find ENFJs driving school buses. You'll find ENFJs running blood drives, okay? You'll find ENFJs conducting church, for example. ISTJs often go to church as well. But you'll find more ENFJs in a church situation than you would, ISTJs, for example. But these are the places that you go to find these types. Well, they're so easily found. It's much harder to find an ENTJ, for example, like in the last natural pair that we talked about. Very hard. But for those types, it's very easy for them to find each other. Very easy. And it's just all centered around volunteer work and public service. They'll find each other right then and there, like without a doubt, without any doubt. So, getting into a natural pair is actually pretty hard. It's harder than, for example, a golden pair. Natural pairs have this thing called the test of the critic. Okay, this is why it's actually harder to get into a natural pair than it is to get into a golden pair. However, it is easier to maintain a natural pair than it is to maintain a golden pair. Much easier. So much easier for a golden pair to maintain, for a natural pair to maintain than a golden pair. But let's talk about passing the test of the critic. So the ISTJ has something called TI critic, and they know where they're stupid and they know where they're smart. They know where they're really intelligent. They know what the facts are. Yeah, they can be really trivial sometimes, but they know what they know, and they also know what they don't know. The thing is, though, is that when they meet an ENFJ, and that ENFJ is making decisions, being very wanton about what they know, they're completely not attracted to that person. They're not attracted to that ENFJ. It's wow, you're actually dumb. You actually walk around being some prideful, arrogant know-it-all, but you don't actually know anything. And it's ridiculous that I know more than you. Unbelievable. This is an ego function, and my shadow function is stronger than you. That's ridiculous. And they'll just write them off. Conversely, an ENFJ with expert intuition critic, seeing an ISTJ taking way too many risks, an ISTJ not being cautious, an ISTJ doing anything to be wanted, anything to be desired, doing favors for people that actually just bring them down, doing favors for people that actually leeching off of them. The ENFJ is completely turned off by the ISTJ just having blind loyalty towards people that take advantage of them consistently. And any critic just hates that. And the any-critic's why should I be far more aware of negative consequences than you? I'm so not attracted to that. That's ridiculous, And so let's look at some of the notes here, for that. The whole point of the test of the critic literally is, they have to look at their other person within a natural pair, and it's hey, they would be more successful in life even if I wasn't here, right? That's how you pass the test of the critic. Because the test of the critic guarantees that the inferior function has way more development in the other person than you do within your own critic function, basically. And that's the foundation of attraction between these two types. So there is an initial requirement within the natural pair that these two types actually have developed their aspiration function, or their inferior function enough to actually be aspirational with it ahead of time. Which we're in the golden pair, that's not necessarily required, but it is required in the natural pair, and that's why it's harder to get into the natural pair. So to just get through my notes here, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. The ENFJ looks at an underdeveloped ISTJ and thinks, wow, your expert intuition inferior is less desirable and more fearful than my expert intuition critic? That's ridiculous. The ENFJ needs to see the ISTJ being strong when encountering the unknown and possess the habits that make them desirable. However, the ISTJ looks at an underdeveloped ENFJ and thinks, wow, your TI inferior is less willing and less capable of verifying than my own TI critic? Where's the verification? You talk a big talk about how much you know, but you don't even bother verifying what you know. You just make decisions based on what is socially acceptable because you can't imagine something being socially acceptable and not true at the same time. You're out of your mind. You see? The ISTJ doesn't want to have to verify every piece of information. ISTJs excel at gathering information, but the ENFJ should be capable of validating or invalidating said information. The ISTJ doesn't want to have to do that on their own. So without the critic's respect, basically, the basic principle for this relationship is violated. They would be successful in life even if they'd never met me, even if I was never in their life. And that's something that's so entirely critical, in order to pass the test of the critic. Now again, in terms of maintaining the relationship, they have to pass the test of the parent. But we'll actually talk about that later. So let's go in deep on cognitive functions and what these two types interact with each other. The ISTJ is all about aware of their comfort and with their integrated sensing hero. The ENFJ is all aware of the comfort level of the ISTJ and is seeking to make them more comfortable. The ISTJ is very aware of what the ENFJ thinks, and the ENFJ very much cares about what they think because it's their inferior function. The ISTJ is all about how they feel. Well, guess what? The ENFJ very, very much cares about how the ISTJ feels, and often seeks to make the ISTJ feel better. And the ISTJ is so afraid of being unwanted, but the ENFJ would never, ever allow that fear of lack of desire. That ENFJ will always make the ISTJ feel included, feel wanted, literally seek the ISTJ out. So the ISTJ never has to feel lonely, never has to feel rejected, or not really rejected, more like dejected, I guess. Dejected. SI users, especially NE users like myself, I often feel dejected. It's not so much rejected. Dejected. Dejected means I'm not even a consideration to begin with. It's like when, in my 20s, I was entirely invisible to women. Entirely invisible to them. I was dejected. I wasn't even a consideration. I wasn't even a choice. That's what dejection feels like. And ISTJs are deathly afraid of dejection, just like ISFJs are. But it's all about dejection because they walk around feeling like they have the status of dejection. Like it is a standard of living for them that they are dejected. And the ENFJ comes in and is like, no, you never have to feel that way ever again. You are not dejected, you are chosen. And the ISTJ just melts into a puddle over that. Completely melts into a puddle. This ends up leading to an amazing sexual relationship. Just remember, when it comes to the natural pair is the relationship of ease. It's also the relationship of healing. It is the most downhill relationship ever. Downhill meaning going downhill is easier than going uphill, basically. Whereas the golden pair is just a straight line directly to each other. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. But this is just a nice downhill, breezy little walk on the trail, slight downhill grade, super easy, kind of quick. That's why natural pairs, when they get into relationships, it's so much, so quickly, so fast. These are the relationships when people get together, especially ENFJs and ISTJs. I've noticed this particular pair. So as soon as they meet, within 2 weeks, they're married, basically. That's a thing. That happens to this particular natural pair. It's so fascinating to watch. And then they stay together till they die and have children, and it's amazing. And it's always this great story they get to tell people about how it was literally love at first sight. Well, the natural pair is often love at first sight. It really is. It is the love at first sight relationship. And ISTJs and ENFJs really take it to that level. Probably more than the other natural pairs, let's be honest. They will elope super quick. They don't waste any time. The ENFJ is oh, that's the outcome I want. And the ISTJ is well, I'm super quick, decision's made, FI child's good, we're good. Let's move on. I don't need anyone else. I'm good. And then boom, they're all in. They're all in. Which is fantastic. It's great that they have that opportunity for a relationship. It's awesome. They have all of those corners, obstacles, everything handled. And like I said, it's a love at first sight relationship, but like I said, they will act on it. They will act on that love at first sight. And they're married 2 weeks later. He's what the hell just happened, man? What? Really? But it's so good for them. It's so good. And this is one of the relationships where I'd highly actually encourage that. I would encourage that. Fast commitment with these two. Absolutely. So yeah. So in the natural pair, extroverted functions always have introverted functions to consume. The natural pair excels at creating and maintaining this energy. So within the natural, each type's hero function is pumped by the other's child. The natural is magnetic because each child idolizes their other's hero. The theme of the natural is the childhood hero and the awe that follows. The FI child is in awe over how ethical and how giving and how caring the ENFJ is. whereas the ENFJ's extroverted sensing child is in awe of introverted sensing hero's level of comfort, as well as introverted sensing hero's ability to be content with very little. ISTJs have that in spades, and the ENFJ is just awestruck by that. So the ENFJ sometimes likes to go all out and be all special, but the ISTJ, they see the ISTJ being so content with very little, and it just takes this huge burden off of the ENFJ, because the ENFJ is like, wow, I don't actually have to perform that well, because the ISTJ is just eating up what little I actually give them anyway. And that's why I was talking about precedent earlier, and how important precedent is to this relationship, because it sets that precedent, and just how important that precedent is, okay? It's really fun to watch. I love watching this relationship. It's probably one of my most favorite natural pair relationships. It's just incredible. I love it. So let's look at their optimistic functions. So introverted sensing hero and extroverted sensing child, which is the justification loop for this cognitive loop. Introverted sensing hero loves to be impacted by the ENFJ's extroverted sensing child. The ENFJ leads the ISTJ in shared experiences and is attuned to the ISTJ's comfort needs. The ISTJ finds it easy to be loyal when the ENFJ consistently provides great experiences. The ISTJ will absolve the mistakes of the ENFJ and forgive any failures. Very forgiving. Forgive any failures, right? So long as extroverted sensing child continues to perform. But like I was saying earlier, folks, the ISTJ actually goes out of the way to provide a high level of encouragement to the ENFJ. So they are even encouraged to perform even more, because all of their mistakes are constantly justified. The ISTJ will literally find excuses to excuse the failure on the part of the ENFJ, which takes all the anxiety away from the ENFJ. And they're like, oh, thank God this person exists. Oh my God, thank God, you know. And then looking at the extroverted feeling hero to the introverted feeling child, which is the validation cognitive loop. The ENFJ offers validation to the introverted feeling child's morals and moods, as well as helps shape their principles, okay? The FI child finds constant receptiveness in the extroverted feeling hero, and ENFJ supports the ISTJ and absorbs their values. It's not, okay, that's a really classy, complex way of saying that the ENFJ will always do what the ISTJ likes. And the ISTJ never has to worry about the ENFJ not being willing to do what the ISTJ likes, which also translates into the ISTJ feeling wanted, which is amazing, okay? So let's look at their pessimistic functions. So introvert intuition parent, right? The impulsive behavior of the ENFJ. The impulsive behavior of the ENFJ. So like the ENFJ's introvert intuition parent provides a vision or a pathway, basically, to the ISTJ's extrovert intuition inferior. The ENFJ is open to the choices and warnings provided by extrovert intuition inferior and validates the ISTJ by pursuing a future with the ISTJ's safety in mind. The ISTJ is just aware of how impulsive the ENFJ can actually be and how the ENFJ is like always overdoing things. The ISTJ helps provide a standard of temperance, I would say, or boundaries, and making those boundaries clear to the ENFJ, so the ENFJ never has to be worried or afraid of failing, basically, which is important to the ENFJ, and that's great. That's fantastic that that's able to happen, and that's one of the reasons how it's the extrovert intuition inferior giving vision to the NI parent, so that the NI parent doesn't go overboard, basically. That's really important. Like preventing, it's like proactive mistake prevention. The ISTJ helps the ENFJ learn how to be proactive instead of reactive, basically. And then extroverted thinking parent to the TI inferior, which is the justification loop. Extroverted thinking parent accepts that it needs to understand the ENFJ's perspective. Extroverted intuition parent, or extroverted thinking parent, ensures that the ENFJ is getting quality input to help the ENFJ think well and think properly. Oftentimes, the ENFJs are so stressed out about how much research they have to do to figure out to make sure that what they think is correct and how much time it takes for them to verify things. But ISTJs are walking verification helpers. They help TI users, especially TI inferiors, verify what they know. And it really speeds up things, and it helps the ENFJ grow faster, and actually helps the ENTJ become far more intelligent than they ever were before. So the ISTJ justifies the ENFJ so long as the ENFJ is careful in their thinking and, willing to listen. The ISTJ basically helps the ENFJ get to a point where the ENFJ realizes that they can trust the ISTJ enough to actually listen to the ISTJ. Wow. What an incredible relationship. But like all relationships, things can go wrong. Things absolutely can go wrong. So when the natural pair goes wrong, for example, remember, the biggest risk for every single natural pair is enablement or enabling behavior. In this particular case, though, with the ISTJ and the ENFJ, codependence is a big deal, especially on the side of the ENFJ. Codependence is a big problem. Enablement normalizes destructive or irresponsible behavior, okay? What causes enablement? When the hero and child loop never stops. It's basically when the natural pair's parent functions just aren't around. They're like absent parents. And it leads to a high amount of irresponsibility. This is caused by absent parent functions, like we just discussed. So for the ENFJ and the ISTJ specifically, this manifests as, quote, endless sensory exchanges and constant seeking of exciting experiences, introverted sensing hero to extroverted sensing child loop, and endless emotional and idealistic exchanges between the extroverted feeling hero and introverted feeling child. Without the parent function's involvement, the living virtues are often suppressed, and the deadly sins are expressed more often. So basically, the ISTJ ends up enabling the ENFJ's high level of pride. So they just become big know-it-alls and even more prideful, which just causes them to alienate everybody in their life. And then what the ENFJ ends up doing is that they enable the ISTJ to basically become entirely irresponsible. The ISTJ, and basically the ISTJ just becomes a slob. An irresponsible slob, an irresponsible burden, basically. And this is so interesting because, like, I see, like, for example, like this type, like this pair, they can end up becoming insanely obese. The ISTJ is super mega fit. They get with the ENFJ. The ENFJ starts doing amazing things in the kitchen, and then just over time, they just end up getting entirely obese. And it's ridiculous, but very common. And it's because, the ENFJ knows no amount of self-discipline. There's a huge lack of self-discipline there, and they just don't know when to stop. But the ISTJ is so happy with the sensory experiences produced by the ENFJ that they just kind of just stop caring, and they lose all self-discipline, and it just kind of blows up in everyone's face. Enabling is a huge issue. So, not only that, the ISTJ's wrath becomes enabled, and the ENFJ's own cruelty ends up transmuting over to the ISTJ, and the ISTJ can become crueler and crueler and crueler over time, and they become angry and they take out their wrath on other people. This could end up causing them to be in jail because they are because they're so enabled. Their wrath is so enabled. And instead of the ENFJ providing that temperance for the ISTJ's wrath, instead they actually enable the anger of the ISTJ, and the ISTJ can develop an insane anger problem as a result of being in this relationship, which could have insanely disastrous effects, like the ISTJ on the job just lets go of all responsibility and just is so super angry and then pops off at the boss and then gets fired, all because the ENFJ was enabling their anger at home. Wow. That's not good. That's not appropriate. So that's a huge problem. Without the parent function, there's really no one to challenge the hero. The child is starstruck and won't criticize their hero. But the parent is unimpressed with stardom of the hero and is supposed to be there to tell the hero, hey, I see that you're flying around saving the world, but you're causing collateral damage that are harming the children and the babies. You should probably calm down. So when the parent function is not there, the parent function is absent, well, this relationship basically becomes a race to the bottom. So how do you maintain the relationship then? Well, that's the test of the parent. The test of the parent function is the key to the long-term strategic success of the natural pair. The test of the parent. And they can always go back to the test of the parent to make sure that the relationship continues, to make sure that the relationship never actually stops, that the relationship continues moving forward in a healthy, responsible manner. Because the reality of the situation is that in order for the natural pair to be successful, they have to be willing to take responsibility for the other person's personal growth. Yes, in order to get in the relationship, in order to pass the test of the critic, there would already have to be, there would already have to be a large amount of self-improvement, of personal growth already, because their inferior functions are partially developed, if not well on the way to development, to the point where, yeah, they'll be super developed with their inferior in their life anyway. The problem is that due to the enablement risk of the natural pair, this relationship could actually enable the other person into, and enable each other into, not growing their inferior functions anymore. And then they stop growing, basically. Their relationship can get stagnant, and that's a huge problem. And so the parent functions are supposed to be there to prevent this. So the NI parent, basically, is supposed to make sure that it's expecting the extrovert intuition inferior to make sure that they are desirable. This means this would require then introverted sensing hero to have self-discipline. So the ENFJ would just go up to the ISTJ and be like, yeah, you're getting pretty fat, or you need to put in more effort, or you need to get off your ass, and just tell them, like, look, you need to be way more responsible. You need to actually be a desirable person. You need to be putting in more effort. You need to be more careful. You need to be safer. You need to be a safer person, right? That's ultimately what the NI parent's job is, to make sure that the ISTJ stays on track with their aspirational capabilities with extrovert intuition inferior. Well, conversely, the extroverted thinking parent is supposed to be putting additional pressure on the introverted thinking inferior, so that the introverted thinking inferior is not at risk of being a know-it-all, that the introverted thinking inferior is continuing to verify everything they know, that the introverted intuition inferior, or introverted thinking inferior, is not relying on what is socially acceptable as the basis for what they know. Because that's just entirely bothersome. I hate when FJs do that. And ISTJs exist to make sure FJs don't do that. Thank God for ISTJs to do that. You know. So let's look at it. Let's look at it from a practical perspective here. So why is the parent's presence so vital? Each parent function serves two essential roles for the ENTJ, or for the ENFJ and the ISTJ. The first role is in interrupting and refining the hero-child loops. The second role is by putting the appropriate amount of pressure on the inferior function to ensure consistent personal growth and continued aspiration. Okay, that's the point of the test of the parent. Okay, introverted intuition parent must interrupt the introverted sensing, extroverted sensing loop by committing to their introverted intuition, desires and what they want for the future. The ENFJ and ISTJ can no longer live for just the present moment and learn to build a future together, but also to make sure that the ISTJ is not becoming a slob and actually keeping their desirability, so that they're never so afraid of being unwanted. The ENFJ is supposed to be like, hey, telling the ISTJ, hey, I want you to put in more effort so you stay desirable, or you become more desirable than you were yesterday. That's the ENFJ's job, okay? And the ISTJ's job is like, hey, you need to be thinking about these things differently. Here's a bunch of the research that proves that just because this is socially acceptable doesn't mean it's right. Pay attention. Actually think about things properly and have healthy thinking for once, instead of outsourcing your thinking to what is socially acceptable. This is how an ENFJ with their INFP shadow can become credulous, by relying on what is socially acceptable to guide their thinking. And the ISTJ is like, no, that's not the right thing to do. That's the wrong thing to do. And I'm affiliative. I know. You know what I'm saying? That's the whole point. An I parent must also put enough pressure on the ISTJ to steer them into the unknown with courage and caution. The ISTJ needs to learn how to embrace the new and be willing to take risks, because they see the NI parent is willing to take risks. And luckily, the ISTJ is affiliative. They're both affiliative, so they end up taking risks together, which causes the ISTJ to grow more. Amazing. Okay? An extroverted thinking parent. Extroverted thinking parent must interrupt the extroverted feeling, introverted feeling loop by introducing new perspectives that challenge their own belief system, as well as the ENFJ's thinking. Challenging thinking. If the ISTJ is not going to go around challenging the thinking of the ENFJ is just going to decay into a puddle of stupid. Literally. Because it is stupid to allow what is socially acceptable to guide your own thinking. This is why I walk around oftentimes criticizing ENFJs for being stupid, even though they have the potential to become some of the most intelligent people that walk the earth. And it's because they outsource their thinking to what is socially acceptable, or they think that what is socially acceptable automatically makes things true. And it takes a huge portion of their life to actually figure that out. And it's so frustrating and annoying. Ugh, gross. Extroverted thinking must also put pressure on the ENFJ to think, and to think carefully and thoroughly, using the ISTJ's input as well as input showing the ENFJ how to gather their own input responsibly when the ISTJ isn't even around. Oh my God. Welcome to the test of the parent. The ISTJ gently takes introverted thinking inferior along for thoughtful conversations and intellectual refinement, as well as introducing them to all of the new research, not necessarily just traditional research and traditional thinking. They're willing to go beyond, and even to the point where the ISTJ isn't afraid to be fringe with new input that they're providing to the ENFJ. Those are the most special ISTJs out there, the ones that are willing to do that. My friend Jason is one of those ISTJs. The burden of these types expressing their living virtue and using their deadly sin well is a responsibility shared by the other person's parent function. That's basically why the test of the parent, it's there to make sure that they're keeping each other responsible for their personal growth. Natural pairs, if you are responsible for your lover's personal growth, as much as they are responsible for their own personal growth, but if you're not doing your part to help them grow, you are not only setting them up for failure, you're dooming your relationship as much as you're dooming yourself. What are you doing? You can't do that. It's wrong. The parent function will likely never experience a deeper sense of meaning than within a natural pair. In the natural pair, each parent function is the compatible variant of the other person's inferior function. The parent literally gets the opportunity to raise the other inferior function, or the infant, up. Okay? The parent function is guiding the inferior, guiding the infant, so that that infant can aspire into becoming a hero one day. So that the ENFJ literally can wield the power of TI hero. So that the ISTJ can literally wield the power of extroverted intuition hero and command all desirability, while the ENFJ can command all intelligence, all logical truth. Wow. Ultimately, each parent must take responsibility for the other person's growth and development. Folks, that's what this relationship's all about. That's what the natural pairs are all about. If you want to have an amazing relationship, I highly recommend you invest in the natural pair and you take it to the next level. Your relationship could end up becoming a guidepost or an example to other people out there. People can see just how in love you are. People can see how you're falling in love at first sight. People can see how you got together so quickly, but you kept it together for decades. And you have generations of children coming from you. You are like this beacon of light as an example to other people in this life, that happiness through relationships can actually be achieved. So that people don't have to be so afraid of breakups and divorce and split-ups and cheating and betrayal. Because true love actually can exist. And the natural pair is one of the places where true love not only does exist, but is most likely to exist and come to fruition. You guys just have to be willing to pass the test of the critic, as well as pass the test of the parent. Because if you pass the test of the parent, and that's easy to do so, you just have to take responsibility for the other person's growth. That's where you're not just meeting each other in the middle, which is often what golden pairs do. you're meeting each other at where the other person was previously. You're like coming at each other like this, downhill, and then you're both going uphill the other direction because you're both aspiring. You can meet in the middle, but you're both going back uphill. You're going downhill to each other, it's super great, but then you're going up this way and you're aspiring. And you see each other at the other end, and it's like, wow, look at what we've done together. That's the stuff relationship magic is made for. That's the miracle of masculine and feminine relationships right in front of us. That is, folks, the power of the natural pair. And it is that power that can be wielded by the ISTJ and the ENFJ archetype together to bring about a better future and be an example of fatherlessness being kicked to the curb and the family not just being preserved but being ensured generation after generation, folks. That is the magic of this relationship. Anyway, thanks for watching and listening, folks. Thank you for being paid members. We couldn't do it without you, and I'm very grateful and I'm very thankful for all of you here with me today. Please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.